Thank you all so much for coming. It's really an honor to be in the room, not only with Tzuchien Tho, but also all of you, and you are creating this space and making it all the more enlivened. Thank you so much to the NTU Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures for sponsoring this talk that allows us all to be here today, and to Mr. Hung, who has now left the room but did so much organizational work, and also the student volunteers. I really appreciate it. It is such a pleasure to finally be able to invite Dr. Tzuchien Tho to come give a colloquium lecture. Dr. Tho is a philosopher and historian of mathematics and physics, if you weren't already intimidated, currently working on questions about causality in 18th century physics, focusing on the development of analytical mechanics. He's also working on issues related to Badiou's mathematical ontology, philosophy of algebra, and 20th century Leibniz reception, and epistemological methods of history. Dr. Tho is a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol, and it is such a great honor to welcome him back to Taiwan and to NTU today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lilith, and thank you for your spirit and energy. I feel great already. I have a talk today, which is new research and work that is not, I would say not, even if I've worked on Badiou for a long time, these new variations and new applications, new ideas is new to me. And so what I'm bringing together are some new ideas, new thoughts, and so they're not completely worked through, but hopefully I can put enough elements on the table, on the screen, for us to have a discussion and to kind of see how you respond to these things. So there's going to be a little art history, art criticism today. There's going to be a little bit of Chinese philology. There's going to be some questions about history, a little bit of mathematics, hopefully not too much, a little bit of algebra. What else is there? Poetry, of course. I'll start with poetry, but so I'll just begin and then we'll see where we end up. How about that? And again, I don't think you should wait till the end. If you have questions or clarifications, if you need me to repeat something, or if you had a very strong feeling and just want to interject something, please feel free just to say something. So I'm very happy to stop and to talk through the talk. So yeah. So where do impossible events happen? Event and contingency in Badiou and Yijing. So let me explain some motivation. First, this is Badiou. He was my teacher when I was in Paris, and we've worked together on different kinds of things. I really like this new photo from his memoirs that he released some 2 years ago. He wrote it during the pandemic, and basically talking about his life from 37 to 85 in different snippets. It's a very interesting memoir type project. He came up during, he went to university, well, not university, it's Economal, it's not really a university, it's a Conseil Colloquium, it's a different system. But around the time when Sartre and Beauvoir were sort of, had been famous, but then had gone into kind of more public intellectual role, and they were like less intellectually exciting for the people. But he actually maintained a very long relationship with Beauvoir, and actually reading his autobiography and his memoir reminds me of some of Beauvoir's writing style, but that's a total aside. Another point of motivation is this recent kind of project by Yijing, Xu, on the concept of cosmotechnics, this idea that there's certain kind of, call them technological starting points, and a certain kind of theoretical formation, ways of thinking, a whole package of metaphysical ideas that comes along with, I don't know, civilization might be too strong. It's very hard to talk about these things without kind of essentializing them. So the West, the East, China, these are not very useful concepts, I think. So I try not to use them, or like the East or the West, I try not to use these concepts. But there is something to what Yuk is trying to do. And I'm wondering if we can come at it from a different perspective. And so this is a way of maybe challenging his work, or maybe getting into a dialogue with his work a little bit more. And actually we're quite good friends from Berlin days. And so since we are in the literature department, I thought that maybe I should give a poetic version of the fundamental idea of the whole project. So this is Fernando Pessoa, who is a Portuguese major modernist French modern Portuguese poet, and he writes under different pseudonyms with different personalities. And this is the one that was published under Alberto Cairo. And since I don't speak Portuguese well, I thought maybe you two can help us. This is interpreted by Mario Vargas. Is this not working? We have to refresh. I see. Weird. Okay, so this is strange. Yeah, there we are.
Num dia excessivamente nítido, dia em que me dava a vontade de ter trabalhado muito para nele não trabalhar nada, entrevi como uma estrada por entre as árvores o que talvez seja o grande segredo, aquele grande mistério de que os poetas falsos falam. Vi que não há natureza, que natureza não existe, que há montes, vales, planícies, que há árvores, flores, ervas, que há rios e pedras, mas que não há um todo a que isso pertença, que um conjunto real e verdadeiro é uma doença das nossas ideias. A natureza é parte sem um todo. Isto é talvez o tal mistério de que falam. Foi isto que, sem pensar nem parar, acertei que devia ser a verdade. Que todos andam a achar e que não acham, e que sou eu, porque a não fui achar, achei.
Okay. Add fairly. Sorry, it was unplanned. Okay, so I wanted to focus on this idea that that there are rivers and stones. You see that they also appear in Yijing, but these are not. There's not a whole that these belong to. That a real and true wholeness is a sickness of our ideas. Nature's parts without a whole, and maybe this is the mystery they talk about. Okay? The false poets. Okay, so that is a kind of. I mean, if anything, the philosophical ideas here is just an unfolding of what concretely this means. Right? What does this mean? Parts without a whole. So the Zhouyi is a kind of structureless cosmology, right? It's a way of describing how things hang together, and it's structureless because it plays on one simple thing, which is difference, right? from the broken lines and the solid lines, the combination and variation arranged in a way compared together is the sort of the content of its thought, right? Of course, when we're thinking in this way, we're tending towards, even if you can see in this picture, we have a kind of whole, isn't there? Right? There are parts which form a whole, form a circle. And the variations of the lines constitute the exhaustion of all the possibilities, all the combinatorial possibilities of the pattern of the hexagon, the 6-line structure. The image on the right is actually a picture, a drawing sent by the Jesuit missionary Bouvet to Leibniz, who is the inventor of the binary system. The binary system is the basis of how all of this technology works, right? You have zeros and ones arranged in different patterns, right? Which will give you, right, these are all the possibilities, right? Actually, this one on top. And they give you all the possibilities, and it gives you a new way of writing, numbers. And when Bouvet sent this to Leibniz in the 17th century, Leibniz saw that he sort of remarked about this sort of innovation of Chinese philosophy as a kind of natural religion. And the idea that in the 17th century was that God had revealed religion to the West, right, to the prophets, to Jesus. We just celebrated Easter, didn't we? And he had given the Chinese natural reasoning, right, so that they were able to contemplate divinity without the help of prophecy, right? They could just simply experience divinity in nature. And when he saw this, he immediately saw that there was some kind of like binary system engaged there. It's actually later, it's a classic case of somebody reading into a text, right? Because actually it's structurally equivalent to the binary system, but it's of course not constructed in that way. And so it's. But here we have two different representations, right? So you have this grid structure, which is archaeologically earlier. It's called the Wonwang Shu, the Wonwang arrangement. And then you have the circular structure, which is the Fuxi Shu. It's another way of representing the 64 variations of the Yijing hexagrams. And the circular representation is well, as far as we understand, a later innovation. And they emphasize different things. I'll get back to this point. And of course, like as we saw in the poem by Badiou, we have different elements represented by these different things, right? So the hexagrams are made up of trigrams, and each trigram represents some kind of natural element and some kind of direction, right? So they represent north, south, east, west, northeast, southeast, again, all the combinations of the cardinal directions. And they also represent different natural elements. And so then you have different combinations where you have these different elements being combined in different ways, right? And the significance of something that's being on the top and on the bottom also are relevant to the construction of hexagrams. So here I'll stop talking about Yijing for a second and talk about the grid for a moment. So it's very interesting to think about what this structuralism actually means. What is the sort of philosophical content of this tendency to formalism and to structuralism? Krauss, when talking about grids in modern art, again, contextually quite different, I think said something very interesting. She said there are two ways in which the grid functions to declare the modernity of modern art, right? So she's talking about Mondrian and Jasper Johns and sort of modern art, right? One is spatial, the other is temporal. In the spatial sense, the grid represents the autonomy of the realm of art, right? So the grid serves to stand in as a kind of resistance, right? As a kind of self-constitution, right? Flattened, geometrized, ordered. It is anti-natural, anti-mimetic, anti-real. It is what art looks like when it turns its back on nature. In the flatness that results from its coordinates, the grid is the means of crowding out the dimension of the real and replacing them with a lateral spread of a single surface. In the overall regularity of its organization, it is the result not of imitation, right, but of aesthetic decree. Insofar as its order is that of pure relationship, the grid is a way of aggregating the claims of natural objects in order to have order particular to themselves. The relationship in the aesthetic field by the grid to be in a world apart, and with respect to natural objects to be both prior and final. The grid declares the space of art to be once autonomous and autotelic, right? And autotelic just means having oneself as a goal. It's not a word we learned too. So given those elements, I would like to state kind of the fundamental problem of my project, which is to find an ontological thought, right, that is the thought of real difference. So we distinguish what is really different from what is merely different, okay? This is a kind of common trend. Ontology, right? And so the ontological difference is the distinction between the possible and impossible, okay? So we were looking at the Yijing hexagrams before, right? All of the combinations are all the possible combinations, right? That is what I'm going to be thinking as near difference, right? That one hexagram is different from another hexagram because it occupies another one position of possibility, right? So the ontological difference or real difference is the difference between that and something else, okay? So I'm trying to think about how, the affirmation that the impossible exists but is excluded from mere difference, right? Or presentation. This is getting into Badiou territory now. The idea is that what we're trying to identify is a way to talk about the impossible. And not only to talk about it, but to locate it. Through the resources of the possible, right? To recognize what is outside, beyond, or imminent to, but not present on the surface through the presentation itself, right? So the challenge is to locate real difference in the theory of mere difference. What does that accomplish, really? I mean, we can talk more about that, but what I'm trying to get at is a theory of difference, of a real difference, real ontological difference, that doesn't collapse into some kind of transcendence, right? Okay, everyone okay so far? Okay, so the subproblem one is ontotheology, right? And for those who have studied classic phenomenology, this would be familiar to you, but for those who maybe are more unfamiliar with it, it's going to seem like a very odd problem, right? So essentially, the person who identified this as a problem is Heidegger. Now, Heidegger basically thinks that, well, basically all of the history of metaphysics is the history of ontotheology, because everything is dominated by this relationship to the one, right? Everything that exists has to be a thing, okay? I didn't do the animation correctly, but this is identified most clearly in Leibniz when he argues that whatever is a being is a being. This is also the starting point of Badiou's being an event, right? Whatever is a being is a being. So it's completely wrapped up in the existence conferring property of being a thing, a unit thing, right? And that's why this appeal to the Pessoa poem was very strong for me. When I saw that, I thought, well, this is just a poetic version of this rejection of ontotheology, right? This idea that in order to exist, you have to be a one thing, right? And that in order to understand what exists, we have to understand either the many ways in which being is one, or we have to understand the big one up there, capital O1. That is, whatever version you like, God the Father, Yahweh, whatever version you like, is all a version of that, right? So metaphysics is continues to labor under this idea. However, in the, let's say, before Western metaphysics became its own tradition, we have tradition of this ambivalence. And that's to be found in Plato's Parmenides, the dialogue. Parmenides is a philosopher, right? But Plato's Parmenides is a fictional work about the dialogue between Socrates and the philosopher. So in Parmenides' dialogue, he says something like this, right? Once more, let us inquire if the one is not, and the others of the one are, what follows? Okay, what does that mean? If the one is not, if the big O1 doesn't exist, but something other than one exists, right? But you can think, how can you think of an other than one which is not already somehow one? Right? That's kind of the Leibnizian problem, right? But he's sort of like, let's speculate on this. What follows? In the first place, the others will not be the one nor the many, for in that case, the one would be contained in them. Neither will they appear to be one or many, because they have no communion or participation in that which is not, nor semblance of that which is not. Okay, so this is, again, the unescapable problem of the one. If you want to say something is other than the one, you would say, what? They're many. But isn't the many just made up a lot of ones? So you can't escape the problem of the one in that way, right? So Plato has to speculate to say that it would neither be one nor many. And that seems absurd, right? That seems absurd. He goes on. Because they don't participate in the one, right? If the one is not, the others neither are, nor appear to be one or many, like or unlike, contact or separation. In short, if one is not, nothing is. Now the whole trick, Badiou's whole project, and perhaps the way in which I sort of am also tied into the project to some degree, is to affirm this. Is to affirm that, right? So the way to get out of ontology is to embrace this idea that nothing is. Good. So we need to begin with non-one, the not one, right? How do we begin with the not one? Well, Badiou thinks that we can use mathematics to think multiplicity without the rule of the rulership of the one. And that's essentially, if you want to understand Badiou, that's just the basic project. So how do we do this, right? So you begin by affirming that that nothing is, right? So you begin by affirming, so this is the maths part of the course. So you begin by affirming not, right? And then you argue that you can count or capture with the resource sort of set the not, right? So you're not starting with the one, you're starting with the nothing, and the one is the result of capturing the nothing, right? So everything actually ontologically participates in the not, the nothing, okay? And that way you can have a theory of multiplicity which is prior to the count, which is posterior to the void, right? So if you like, in the beginning was the many, right? And then one day there's the nothing. And only after that do you have to get the one. And of course, after you get the one, you can get the two, you can get the three, you can get the four, etc. And through this process of construction, you can create what we call the universe of constructible sets, right? And this universe is created by the sequencing together of the not, right? The nothing, right? And you can get very, 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 very big numbers from that, right? You can get all kinds of numbers you want. But if you think of this V as a way of arranging all the number of sets that you get, right? And you get up, there's more ways of making that equal number set, right? More and more ways. There's only one way to do 1, right? That's just counting the void. There's only one way. However many ways you count it, it's still the same way. But once you get up to large numbers, there are many ways of putting together something that has that many, right? So, the more, if you go to like a 珍珠奶茶店, they're all the combination. You have 绿茶, 珍珠, like, all that stuff. There are many combinations that you can make out of that. There's many ways of creating something that is the same price, let's say, right? So the more combinations you have, the more ways that you can combine and recombine them, which is why you have a funnel here. So the question is, this, like the Yijing circle, like the Fuji sequence, right, gives all the possibilities you can. So there's a kind of homology then between this modern concept of mathematical objecthood and the combinatorics that's in algebraic combinatorics that's in okay. Why is this text like this? Does that change? Why is this text like that? So here I have another representation of the bowl. Okay, the bowl is just another way of representing the V, right? But the V is a version of the bowl. Okay, so you start with 0, then you move up and up and up and up, right? And you can imagine the bowl growing infinitely large, right? So inside being events, inside Badiou's main work, the goal of defining this theory of presentation is to define a theory of nature that can then be broken, right? So we're defining what is possible, we're defining all the possible spaces, so that we can try to find a way to exclude it, to say, is there something else? Is there something else, okay? So, what did I say again? I don't know what I said. So we right? The distinction is prepared by the relation between being as such and beings, right? So that's mere difference. And the book is successful, let's say, Badiou's book, being an event, is successful only on the basis of the well-orderedness of this universe can ontologically address the gap between being as such and being. So we need to find something, what he calls nature, he calls that nature. He calls it the well-ordered sets, the way in which we slowly grow multiplicity out of the void is what he calls nature. And everything's, you can get everywhere from everywhere else in nature. Okay? So what I mean is, there's a set of instructions. I don't know if the bowl is more helpful or the V is more helpful here. But there's a set of instructions. If you want to say there's a number there, there's a specific construction there, you can always say, you can always give a set of instructions that can take you from any set to anywhere, any other set, right? So, the easy way to think about it is number, right? If you're trying to get a number, there's always two numbers you need to add together to get that number. There's never any number which is somehow lost inside of it. No address you can't get to. Does that make sense? That's the concept of nature, right? That it has order. It has order, right? And that order is defined by mere difference. So typically, set theory, which is typically a form of set theory called ZFC, Zermelo Franco choice. It's a little bit of detail that maybe is not necessary. Lays out a theory of order in relation without the presence of the one. It unfolds multiplicity. I've already said that. So the one is the product of a process and not its origin. I already said that. But some multiple are not just hidden, right? So this is the important point. The structure itself prevents their presentation, okay? And this is where set theory gets even a little bit interesting, right? So if the idea is that if counting, right, this process by which we're counting the void, and counting larger and larger numbers, we're constructing one number from another, generates the world of possible situation, then some multiples are not simply hidden, but impossible, okay? So the whole results, this is the fundamental result of Badiou's mathematical ontology, when you subtract oneness from being, being is not a whole to be examined, because there are ones that cannot appear. So it loses its wholeness. So in order for the system to be rational, it must be incomplete. You might have heard of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's an associated property, right? Right. So one way of capturing it is the so-called forcing method. In fact, the forcing method shows that under appropriate forms of negation, you can show that certain sets exist, but are not constructible. Right? So these sets exist, right? They're not really numbers, but you can think of them as, let's say, the cousins of numbers. The cousins of numbers that live in the shadows, right? They really exist, but they can never come into the world, right? And in fact, their existence guarantees the consistency of the world. Right? So structures, again, this is very counterintuitive, but these infinite structures, they are only consistent, they're only rationally secure if they're incomplete. It's something counterintuitive about that, but that's one of the properties. So this suggests that the ZFC axioms are incomplete and the universe is actually much larger than anticipated, and then therefore ontological difference supersedes mere difference. So this is how it works in set theory. So this idea that I was talking about before about trying to locate ontological difference through the tools of mere difference is done in this way, right? So we can use the tools of set theory to show that there are sets that exist that they cannot construct, right? And there's a whole field now called the theory of large cardinals, which is Badiou's volume 3 of being invented, about that. That is completely based on this new mathematical field of study. It's completely based on the study of these sets that cannot be constructed. And there are an infinite number of them. They're really, really big. They're huge numbers. So, what can the Yijing offer us then? Right? Set theory is very impressive. What can the Yijing offer us? Well, in one traditional interpretation, the Zhuxi's 易学启蒙, second volume, Tzuchien really insists on the totality of the Yijing. He argues, thus each hexagram contains 64, resulting in 4096. This is what is meant by counting by extension, adding to each and explaining them all possible phenomena under heaven are included. How can we not believe it? So, totality. But there are some limits here. I got really interested in doing this research by reading Wang Bi's commentary on the Yijing, which I think he has a very interesting take. So Wang Bi is, I should maybe done a little biographical introduction, but Wang Bi is a late Han Wei kingdom. It's a very short-lived Wei kingdom at the end of the Three Kingdoms period. Person, scholar, and he died very young, something like, I don't think he made it to 30 even. And he wrote, he's most famous for his annotations on the Laozi, on the Dao De Jing, and the Zhuangzi, and the Yijing. Those are his three main works. And especially his commentary on the Yijing has some surprising things, which are not reflected in the, one might argue, the more conservative interpretation of Yijing in the Song Dynasty by Zhuxi that I just quoted. So I'll just quote in the English, right? The translation. So Qian and Kun, which is the Qian is the all solid line hexagram. Kun is the all broken line hexagram. So they represent the polar extremes. One typically represents the north, the other typically represents the south. In the first lines of Yijing, one is represented by the bull and the other represented by the horse, right? So they're kind of these opposite figures, polar opposites, right? Do they not constitute the arcane source of change? Arcane source here refers to the deep, mysterious wellspring. Oh, everything in the brackets are Wang Bi's commentary. And when Qian and Kun form ranks, Chain stands in their midst, right? So when Qian and Kun are compared and all their differences are ranked out, gridded out, let's say, right? Then we can experience or we can present change, right? Right? Only when we have a stable set of mere difference can we represent change. One changes into the other. And when you have the polar distinctions, you know, so one thing changes to the other. But if Qian and Kun were to disintegrate, if we get rid of these limits of difference, right, then there would be no way that change could manifest itself. Right? So you could not have change if you got rid of this polarity. And if change could not manifest itself, this would mean that Qian and Kun might almost be at the point of extinction. Right? It means that the totality, the whole thing might just go. Therefore, what is prior to physical form pertains to the Tao, and what is subsequent to physical form pertains to concrete object of the phenomenal world. Yeah, this is where we get the expression, the Mandarin expression for metaphysics. Right? 形而上学，形上学，形而上者谓之道，形而下者谓之器. That's the kind of fundamental way of thinking about, what are we considering, right? Are we considering the things that are above the phenomenal world, 形而上, right? Things that are before form, right? But here, what he's trying to say is this, right? He's saying that when we have phenomenal transformation, when we have mere difference, right? It needs to be represented by a certain polarity. But there are things that are prior to that polarity. And what is that? What is that? Won't be commentary here. I didn't put the Chinese because actually I couldn't find these passages. I'll have to look harder. But right. And so what does this mean basically, right? Nothing ever happens haphazardly or necessarily follows its own principle. To unite things, there's a fundamental regulator. To integrate them, there's a primordial generator. Therefore, things are complex but not chaotic, multitudinous but not confused. This is why when the 6 lines of the hexagram intervening, one can pick out one of them and use it to clarify what is happening. And as the hard ones and the soft ones supersede each other, one can determine which one is the master and use it to determine how all are ordered. Right? So the idea again is this polarity between the Qian and the Kun gives all the possibility for change. That's how we can keep track of them. Right? So later on he says, in form, a thing might be inclined to agitation, yet wants to be still. Or a material, though soft, still craves to be hard. The soft and hardness refers to the broken line and the soft lines, right? So the fundamental kind of cosmology being that whatever at its peak will start to decline, whatever is in its most declined place will start to move up, right? Just in the way that the hottest part of the day, usually noon time, actually that's not really true, it's hottest around 3, I think, is also the time when it starts to get colder, right? It's the same, that kind of idea. Here, substance and its innate tendency are in opposition, and its material and its inclination are in contradiction. And even the most meticulous reckoning cannot keep track of a number of things, and even the most sage of intellects cannot establish standards for them. Whereas change is something that the laws cannot keep pace with, something that measurements cannot access. Right? So at the same time as these changes are recorded by this 64 positions and their transformations, there's still this idea that even the most meticulous reckoning cannot keep track of such things. Even the most sage of intellects, right, this kind of mystical founding discovery of the Yijing by Lainey Hsu, right? But he's claiming in the commentary that there are changes that even this cannot account for, right? That we cannot keep track of. And then he says something interesting. He says, of course, to happen, these things not to be caused by something great. What's that? So his point is that there's actually very small changes that can change everything, but which is undetectable by the system. All right, and in this we actually get something kind of close to this idea. So we need to then turn to this sub-problem, right? The second sub-problem, which is localization. Because we don't only want a theory that's based on multiplicity and the void, we also, and to actually theorize the theory of the difference between mere difference and real difference, we also want to be able to locate them. We want to know what is our relationship to ontological difference, right? So, exactly. So where does this occur? Badiou turns to two other concepts. One is singularities in worlds, and the other is the covering over truth. So Being an Event is a 3-volume work. I've really talked about the first volume a lot, but in the second volume, Badiou sets aside set theory, and he turns to algebra. And in the theory, in algebra, I won't go through all of it, but in the algebraic theory, he tries to develop this idea that in the world, in our world, there are some singularities whose difference is bigger than other differences, right? And they set the agenda for transformation, for change, right? So it's not simply reshuffling the decks, right? It's not simply reshuffling the deck. It's actually a difference that can transform the world itself. So that's volume 2. In the volume 3, he adopts a different perspective. In the volume 3, he adopts this large cardinal theory, which is the very, very large sets that I was talking about before. And there, he develops this idea that every situation is infinite, and that ideology, and that we are convinced by people, we are told by people that there are only some limited possibilities, right? So you should never try to achieve true justice because there are only limited things that are available to us in this world. You shouldn't try too hard to have a just society. Just tolerate some injustices, that's fine, because it's not possible to change everything. That's volume 3. So in this process, Badiou actually develops a kind of plural ontology. And this plurality helps him to develop different ways of thinking about the relationship between ontological difference and right? So there are three volumes. Being an Event, the main important thing is the ontology of incompleteness that I was just talking about, and that being is in the perspectival position, right? So we're considering the question of the impossible or the ontological difference from the perspective of being. So the most important concept is incompleteness. Second is the subjective transition is the perspectival position in volume 2, meaning that what is most important is the relation between singularity and this agency, and the relation to the subject. And here, incompleteness, though not contradicted, it's not actually very important for a lot of the worlds that he's talking about. And a world is a kind of algebraic formulation, right? Much like the kind of Yijing as algebraic formulation. The third is that the point is that ideology is the kind of covering over of the remains of maximal being, right? So to try to reduce the world to a limited set of finite possibilities, to make us forget that actually things are possible. You can do things, right? And here, truth is in the perspectival position. So the book is written from the perspective of truth. So these are the 3 volumes. I don't have the ability to talk about all of it today, but I just wanted to flash that. So what can Yijing give us finally? So as we talked about, it is a structural cosmology without the one, right? The 2 arises together because that's how differences form, right? So in the beginning was the 2, if you will, right? So you have basically the O and the 1, basically. And the 2 arises together. The 2 emerges as a product of mere difference. So change is localized in the nothing, right? So in this idea is that what transforms is the position, your position within a system of different grids, right? Of different sets of these alternations. So there's no underlying objectivity, there's no underlying object that is undergoing change, right? So we've escaped onto theology because we've escaped this idea that there's some kind of one basic substance that's undergoing change. And as we saw in Zuxi, there is a kind of tension in the commentary tradition that the realm of the possible is given by the completeness, right, of the 64 to the power of 2 changes. Right? Because each of the 64 can transform into each of the other one. So you have this transformation. And so there is in the way in which they're arranged, there is a kind of ambivalence within the tradition of how to understand either the completeness or the theory of change that's inside the system. One begins with the polarity. Do you have a laser pointer? One begins with the polarity, right, with the chin and the kun, right? Meaning you start with the 2 most extreme differences. And then you start to arrange through the grid positions. It's almost like you take one and you flip it around to the other one. So this grid represents a kind of a theory based on how changes can be arranged, how neutral transformations can be arranged. And of course, you can move through this grid any way you want. The Fuxi arrangement identifies the completeness, sort of emphasizes the completeness of the 64 trigrams, because the Qian and Kun are polar opposites, and they show the continuity of transformation from one form to another form, right? And so you get a circle out of it, right? And so there are 2 different ways of thinking transformation within the same tradition. And so to talk about position, we talk about the theory of time, localization, and temporality in the Yijing. I think this is probably the most fruitful part of the talk in the paper that is actually not really fully developed yet, so please bear with me. Time is captured by this tendency, right? Because each hexagram is on its way to another hexagram, right? Change. And the divisionation ritual, so I've talked about the Yijing as a kind of a theoretical object, but actually it's a ritualistic object, right? Because it's used to practice divination, right? I haven't talked about that at all, right? But it produces not only an image of the situation, right? A relationship that you have to some kind of real situation in nature, like some kind of xiao, but also the localization of the agent. Because when you do the divination, based on how you do it, you're going to find yourself in a position where one of the lines are going to be more significant than the other lines. Okay? And that, let's see. Right, let's say you, I don't know what that is, but let's say when you land upon this figure, right, you actually identify one line that is going to be the more relevant to you in your situation, right? Purely by chance, of course. And then this gives you a theory of time, right? Because it tells you your position and your tendency, right? It means that you're moving into another phase. Right? It tells you exactly how you move into another phase. So the temporality is located within the process of divination. And right, the temporality is implied by the transformation of one situation into another, which is the agent's position. Possibility and contingency is thus given in a static image. Right? We can call this the static synthesis of time. Right? So the temporality is synthesized into a static image and your location within that image. And therefore, change in general is represented through the contingency of the ritual, right? So there's a dynamic aspect to this as well, right? Because you are involved in a kind of ritualistic relationship with this Yijing counting, right? So you have a static synthesis of time, but a kind of a dynamic synthesis of position, right? So where are you kind of geographically, located within that map? is given a dynamism because there is the chance that's occurring while you're doing the divination process, right? I don't know if for fun we can do it later if you want. So the algebraic transformation of the images exhausts these homological relations between possible positions, and the hexagrams are not mere mode of presentation to demonstrate what is outside of possibility, but the commentary seems to locate it there. Is this an alternative to incompleteness? Right, so I just want to look at some passages of 1P commentary and to kind of locate, to kind of think through about what this means, right, this theory of time, right? So pretty early on in the commentary, section 5, book 1, he says, you know, yeah, this is just the commentary, this is not, there's no original bits of the so anyway, it's hard to name because it's 1P's commentary on the commentary, so it's a meta commentary, if you will. So 1P says, you know, what is the Tao? It's a name for a non-being, right? It's a name for Wu. It is that which pervades everything, and it is that from which everything derives. As an equivalent, we can call it Tao. As it operates silently and is without substance, it is not possible to provide images for it. Right? That means to say that there's kind of reality that is underneath what is captured by the 64 hexagrams. It's not possible to provide any images. Again, 1B, through reading the Yijing, is trying to locate what is not located in there. And only when the function of being reaches its zenith do the merits of non-being become manifest. Therefore, even though it so happens that the numinous is not restricted to place and change and is without substance, yet the Tao itself can be seen. It is by investigating change thoroughly that one exhausts all the potential of the numinous, and it's through the numinous that one clarifies what the Tao is. Right? So again, like some of the passages we looked at before, right? Only within the organized structure can you capture the non-organized. Right? Only within what is manifest can you capture the non-manifest. Although yin and yang are different entities, we deal with them in terms of the unity of non-being. So underlying the yin and yang, underlying difference is non-being. When the Tao is in the yin state, it does not actually exist as yin. It is by means of yin that it comes into existence. And when it is in the yang state, it does not actually exist as yang, but it is only by means of yang that it comes into being. This is why it's referred to the reciprocal process of yin and yang. So the entire theory of change, what is locked inside images, is given through this, well, he's identifying some kind of ultimate reality to which it belongs, which can be called Taiji, or, right? So he says, you know, 是故亦有太极. Therefore, in change there is the great ultimate. Right? Is it a one? Is it a kind of oneness? Right? This is what generates the two modes. He just says that it is. Right? So I think I did find this. Right. So again here, being necessarily has its origin in non-being. Thus, the great ultimate generates the two modes. Great ultimate is the term for that which has that for which no term is possible. Again, like it's the idea that this multiplicity is generated, and the terms that we have generated cannot capture that which is generated. As we cannot lay hold of it and name it, we think of it in terms of the ultimate point to which we can extend being and regard them as equivalent to the great ultimate. The sages, explored the ultimate significance of the numbers connected with change and its consummation, and in consequence exhausted the potential of benefit involved. This is why the text says, as for change, when one proceeds of it reaches its limit, a change from one state to another, as such, change achieves free flow, and with this free flow, it lasts forever. Okay? So what does that mean, right? So basically, it's like when you've exhausted the theory of change beyond the possible spaces, right? You enter into a theory of time that is a pure flow. That is not the flow from one position to another, but flow itself. And therefore, is eternal, right? Or outside of time, right? We can say lasts forever, we can say eternal, we can say it's not inside time. And how does it start, right? So this is a very interesting theory of subjectivity, right? As for incipience itself, incipience means something that's sort of about to happen, right? It is the infinitesimal small beginning of action, the point at which the recognition of good fortune can occur. Incipience is the point at which something leaves non-being and enters being. As it is still in the realm of the principle, it lacks any phenomenal aspect, so one cannot pin it down by name and cannot perceive its shape. This comes very close to the idea of a strong singularity in the second poem of Badiou. And I found the passage to be actually quite fascinating, right? 七种 as the incipience, right? And 动之微, right? So it's translated by infinitesimal, right? So it's just slightly moving, right? And so we can use this to reflect on the earlier passage when he says, you know, sometimes these things that cannot be, these changes occur that cannot be captured by the form, and he says it's not something great. It's not something great. It is small, 动之微, right? Yeah, and so all that's left. I'm just going to leave you hanging with some of those ideas, but I'm gonna leave you with a few comments then as concluding. Right. So, how can we draw? What is the relation between? How can we identify things? Basically, how do we locate things within structures? Right. Where do they reside? Right. That is the challenge of the project, right? And can this static synthesis of change be balanced? Sorry, misspelling there. Be balanced with dynamic presentation of difference, right? How can this alternation between mere difference and ontological difference be balanced with this Yijing static synthesis of change? And from the Yijing itself, right? What is the relation? Right? How do forms move from non-being to being in this commentary tradition of the Yijing? Right. So the struggle is precisely to present non-being in this context. And so there's a double problem of the incompleteness. It's subproblem 1, I called it, and the localization, which is subproblem 2, that I called it. That brings mathematical ontology into dialogue with the structural cosmology of the Yijing, right? So this might be the difference between a kind of unary construction and this binary construction. So construction by one versus construction by two. And how can we think more thoroughly this difference between Badiou's approach, general approach through set theory is regarded by arithmetic, generally thinking about numbers, versus algebra, which is guided by metaphor and homology, how structures mirror each other as fundamental ontology, right? What is gained and what is lost when we move between these different registers of these different kinds of tools, let's say. And so that's it. That's what I have for you today. Thank you.